Hello drone racers! I recently reviewed the Gamebox Dual Go 4, it's still a mouthful, and one of the downsides that I had with it is it only came with the XT60 connector cables. But I have a solution. I got this from Banggood, which it comes with an XT60 connector, so it connects on from this side, and then it gives me pretty much everything I might ever need. It gives me an XT90, which is humongous, a Dean's connector, which I still have some Dean's connector batteries, a JST lead, an XT60, so if I don't have to disconnect it, and then it's a servo lead, which that's kind of weird. I don't know why I need a servo lead. There's probably some batteries that use that, but that might even be for something else. In this case, I don't really need this one. What I do need is an XT30 connector because most of my small 3S batteries now are XT30s. And when I saw this online, I originally thought this was a 60 and this was a 30 because in the picture I couldn't tell. But no, there's no 30 on it. So what I'm gonna do today is take this and I'm gonna add an XT30 connector because I really need one. So this is gonna be a slight soldering tip for XT30 connectors if anybody ever needs one, and I guess we could call it how to solder XT30 connectors. So I actually got two of them. One of them's already done, so now this one's ready to go. But let's get this one. So I ended up with a bag of XT30 connectors years ago, accidentally, when I thought I was ordering XT60s. I didn't think I would ever use them, but now, 3 years later, they're actually coming in handy. I've used a number of them. So to do this, you need the cables themselves, some XT30 connectors, a pretty good set of wire crimpers. You can use an X-Acto knife, which is what I used to use, but wire strippers just work out better. A soldering iron, it doesn't have to be a really good one for this. Some solder, and I recommend a set of pliers. We'll get to that in a minute. So my comment down below if for this video is going to be, what have you seen with this connector on it? Do you have anything that uses this type of connector? Because I've got a lot of different connectors. I know RC guys use different ones. There's those blue barrel connectors. There's the old Tamiya connectors that we used to have. I don't know anything. That's just a servo lead to me. Anyway, so I just cut that off using the cutters here. I think this is probably 22 gauge wire. This is one of the smaller ones. Yep, there we go. This is one of the smaller wires in this connection, but I think for what we're doing here, it's gonna be fine. Don't need a lot of wire, just a little bit off of there. And give this a twist. There we go. So get those twisted, and soldering iron is hot, so we'll go to that. Gonna use my atrociously bad handy helpers here. Hopefully we get an update video on that with something better soon, but today we've got these garbage ones. So you want to tin the wires, and you want to tin the wires ahead of time because you don't want to try and melt the solder through the wire while you're trying to get it connected to another piece. So to tin the wires, I'm gonna put just a little solder on here, and I like to get the soldering iron wet first. And then I put it on the other side because having some solder on the soldering iron helps get the heat into the wire versus just putting the soldering iron directly on the wire. It helps, it kind of surrounds it, binds it, holds the wire together. All right, so wire for this one, we got the black one too, same deal. It heats the wire, get it on, and just get it connected through there. So there's the wire side. Now here's a trick if you haven't ever soldered. It was probably worse with Dean's connectors, but I still do it with these. All you actually need is this side, and you could tin this connector, but I always take the other side and get them connected first because the heat that goes into this will get so hot it will melt this plastic and the connector will come loose and move on you if they're not really, really well done. Getting them held together makes it a lot safer and a lot stronger. Now next is where the pliers come in. I have some rubber bands on these pliers. So what I can do here is grab a hold of this and it will hold it very firmly in place for me, almost too firmly. So I've got my pliers here and I've got it spaced now, and that will just get a hold of that to keep it in place and hold it for me. So when I set it here, I can push this down, but it will help keep it from moving. Now I just need to tin both of these sides too and just get a little heat in here. There we go. And get a little cup there. And get a little cup here. Now you still don't want to heat these for too long because they will melt the plastic, as I mentioned. Okay, now we just put the wire in there, right? Wrong. Heat shrink. It's very, very important. You're going to forget it over and over and over until you do this hundreds of times, and then you're still going to forget it again. I have a big kit of a whole bunch of different sizes of heat shrink. If I can find a link for one, I will link that down below as well. But heat shrink is way better than electrical tape. I want to slide this on here, and I have some heat shrink that the most important part is to make sure it fits over this piece, and it does. It fits over there. It's good and tight, so that way when I shrink it, it will hold tightly. So this one is actually really easy to work with. I've got plenty of space here to slide the heat shrink on and get it way far away from the wire. So I've got it that far away. Normally when you're working with this, you can't get it that far away. In this case I can because of the length of these wires. Way far away, because once it shrinks on you on the tube, it's very difficult to work with. So now all we have to do is get back in here, make sure I'm on the positive, so this is the plus, that is the positive side, and I actually have a little too much wire exposed here, but I'm going to get it into the cup, get it good and solid, and what I try and do is get it so the wire touches the metal inside. I don't want it just stuck into the middle of the solder. I want it to actually have metal on metal contact. So there's one side. We'll flip it over. So word of caution if you're doing this with a battery, because you can do the exact same thing with a battery. If you have this terminal, this is worse with XT60 connectors, make sure when you have this other side, it doesn't come in contact with this metal, because it will short out and create a circuit and spark on you. Trust me, I know from experience. So got here, got it in there, got a good connection, got it good and solid. Let it cool for a minute before you move the heat shrink tube, because it will, if it's still hot, it will shrink before it gets where you want it to go. So you want it to be good and cool so the heat shrink is not going to shrink anymore. Now you notice I have a lot of heat shrink on here, and I like a lot of heat shrink. It holds onto the wire. The worst thing I hate to do is get it too short, and then next time you pull on it, it comes loose and gets off, and you have to fight with it forever. If you put a lot on there, the more you have, the more contact it'll make, the more grip it will have, so you don't have to deal with it later. There are a lot of philosophies on how to heat shrink tube. Some people just use their soldering iron and use this edge of it and just kind of rub it until it starts to shrink in, and that works well enough. Some people will use a lighter, but I prefer a heat gun I stole from my wife's scrapbooking kit. So this will blow hot air, and it's hotter than a hairdryer to get it all shrunk. I find that to be the most consistent with getting it all evenly shrunk. So now we have an XT30 connector. That makes this good to go. So this is technically a review of this cable, and that's the only downside, the lack of an XT30 connector. Other than that, I really like this. I like that they're covering the Dean's connector. This is why you have to cover Dean's, because that's exposed connectors. You can't have that. That would be bad. Even these are a little more exposed than I would prefer. It would be nice if these were covered or had some kind of a plug in them, but I don't think we're going to run into a problem there. Last tip for the heat shrink tube. Don't leave your heat shrink here underneath when you go to heat shrink this, because that heat will transfer and you could end up with a whole bundle of heat shrink tube that's all shrunk. I bet there's at least one of you that sees this has had that happen. So if you found this useful, leave a like down below and comment down below with what kind of battery has a servo lead on it. Have you ever seen one? What did it connect to? It had to be really small. And until next time, remember, it's probably only a few years before our drones need this XT90 connector, as ridiculous as that is.